pleasure to be here next presentation. I'm going to talk about one of my major projects on imaging genetics of dysphonia. And please interrupt me if there's something unclear or you have any questions. I want to again point out that spasmodic dysphonia is a neurological disorder. And for that, I'm going to cover what it entails to have spasmodic dysphonia from the perspective of the brain and genes that are possibly involved. The pathophysiology of spasmodic dysphonia as well as other dystonias can be subdivided roughly into three categories. One of them is brain organization, which is most likely abnormal in patients with SD. The other category is genes. We don't know what is causing spasmodic dysphonia genetically, but there is a good evidence that it may be inherited. Some patients, about 16% of patients with spasmodic dysphonia, mention that one or more family members have one or the other type of dystonia. There is also an effect of environment, as just you gave an example of cold and flu and stress and numerous other factors that might influence the development of dystonia as well as progression or improvement in some cases. So let's talk about brain organization. We know that brain function and network is abnormal in spasmodic dysphonia. Let's look into the networks. What is a network? By definition, it's an interconnected or interrelated chain, group, or system. It is important to understand this notion because it is different from what brain activity shows us. For example, let's take a number of people sitting in this room or standing on the slide, and they may or may not be connected. If we look into brain activity, we may see different regions that may light on during the task or performance of specific behavior. It doesn't actually mean that they're all connected to each other. For example, take the same group, or that's a different group, and there are some clusters of people that are talking to each other, interacting with each other. There are also some people who are obviously not interested. The same is happening with brain activity versus brain network. They give us different information and we can use them differently. And the literature on brain activity and networks is a little bit crowded and not very precise. I have done a little research last year looking into speech production fMRI studies that capture activity of the brain during speaking. And these studies have been describing activity as well as some components of network, neural network. There were 626 studies that have been done in the domain of speech production. 98 of them actually described that they identified some component of the network. There was a explicit mentioning of speech production network. It turns out that only 21 of these studies have actually performed a network analysis. And when we come down to looking into the differences, here you see brain activity during production of syllables e or ihi. The study was done actually to capture symptoms of AD and AD patients, but these are pictures of the normal brain. And here's the connectivity of network connectivity during production of the same syllable E. As you see, the regions are roughly similar, but they are forming different type of networks. So by looking into this picture of brain activity, we can get informed knowledge of what the network may be. And this is important when we come down to understanding dystonia and spasmodic dysphonia as a network disorder, as a disorder that affects multiple brain regions, as we have seen in numerous studies that map brain activity during production of speech and other behaviors in patients with spasmodic dysphonia. We have numerous brain regions, but we don't know really how they are connected to each other, how they interact, or how they influence each other. So one way to assess network is to use now very popular method of resting state activity. Resting state functional MRI is a neuroimaging method to evaluate regional interactions based on low frequency spontaneous fluctuations in the fMRI signal that occur when the subject is not performing an explicit task. So you might think we're just resting, how it may be relevant to our symptoms, because we don't have actually symptoms when we're resting, and we're actually not doing anything. So that's actually not true. Our brain is doing something all the time. And our brain is subdivided in a way that forms these networks, the intrinsic networks that are present no matter if we do tasks or not. So it's kind of a background on which we build our task performance. Resting state networks, these independent networks, have been identified in a number of studies and replicated and validated. This is the largest to date study that included 29,671 healthy subjects and looked for the organization of this resting state networks, and then validated in a smaller group of subjects, such as 6 individuals, as not every study is able to recruit about 30,000 patients or subjects to start with. And these networks have been shown to be very reproducible and very stable. Here you see, and by doing this type of analysis, several types of networks have been identified. So on the right you see networks in 36 individuals, and on the right you see networks from 30,000, around 30,000 subjects. And you can see that they are very similar to each other, and in this manner we can subdivide the resting activity of the brain into several domains. This network is responsible for processing visual information. This is a so-called default mode network, which is a resting mode of the brain and has been identified in all resting state studies. Next network identified is a cerebellar network. This is a brain region that works in conjunction with the cerebral cortex and is responsible for numerous behaviors and activities and so on. So it forms a separate network. Next one is sensory motor network, which is responsible for processing sensory information, motor output, preparation to movement, and so on. And it covers accordingly covers sensory motor regions in the brain. The auditory network is responsible for processing auditory information, similar to visual network. Executive control, these are the regions that are involved in the frontal and parietal cortical areas, and they are responsible for high-level cognitive tasks like decision-making, reward processing, and so on. And finally, frontoparietal network, which involves, as it says, frontal and parietal regions, and this network mostly is there for integrating information from different networks and processing information. For motor control, it helps processing information that is sent to the motor cortex for output. So for the purposes of spasmodic dysphonia or dystonia, we've been interested in a sensory motor network that is controlling our movements, and frontoparietal that helps integration of the sensory motor network. And this is how it looks across healthy subjects. There are about 30 healthy subjects and 60 patients with adductor and abductor spasmodic dysphonia. This is the sensory motor component, and this is the frontoparietal component. So what are the differences in this network in patients with spasmodic dysphonia? In this subgroup of patients, we included SD patients, both AD, AB, as well as patients who have or who do not have family history of dystonia. So we call patients who have family history familial patients, and who do not have family history, we call them sporadic patients. So there is an equal number of all these four groups in this group of common SD patients, and we compared them to healthy controls, 30 healthy controls. And we identified that both within the sensory-motor cortex, the sensory-motor component and from the parietal component, there are specific abnormalities, such as connectivity, not only activity in this region, but also connectivity between these regions is abnormal. That means that they interact. They not only go up or down in their activation, but they also interact differently with each other compared to healthy subjects. Interestingly, this was an expected finding, but interestingly, we looked into sporadic and familial patients, and we identified within the same network another set of abnormalities that differentiated, distinguished patients with sporadic dystonia with familial dystonia. So now, saying sporadic is a very abstract notion, because genes that are unknown for now, they have very low penetrance, which means that they don't show up in immediate generations. So there is a patient who presents as a sporadic spasmodic dysphonia that may be a carrier of a mutation, because the gene is so low in penetrance that we don't know that a family member may have also dystonia, maybe 10 generations down the road. But at the neural level, we are still able to differentiate these two groups. Now, going to AD versus AB forms, they were abnormalities only within the sensory-motor cortex, and this sensory-motor component, not frontal-parietal component, and this might be explained by the fact that probably there is a specific abnormality within the laryngeal motor cortex that controls AD and AB muscles separately. So this is interesting, of course, to map and understand. But our next question was how we can use this information for diagnosis. And we heard a lot yesterday about difficulties to come to agreement in diagnosis and finding the markers based on voice abnormalities, voice quality to diagnose dystonia. So we took another approach and looked into the brain. Can we diagnose dystonia by looking at the brain? Wouldn't it be nice to have something that you would go into scanner and have some abnormality in a specific spot, and probably the rate of misdiagnosis and underdiagnosis will decrease. So that's the whole point of doing this next study. So bottom line from this slide is that the take-home message is that altered functional connectivity in spasmodic dysphonia actually varies based on its genotype and phenotype. And we can use this information to come up probably with some diagnostic markers. So we looked into predictive classification of spasmodic dysphonia. There are methods that are called machine learning algorithms that represent a powerful tool as classifiers of the disease diagnosis and prediction. So what we did, we took all abnormalities that we saw in patients with SD versus healthy subjects, and we ranked them, not manually, machine learning algorithms to do that, by their ability to differentiate between healthy subjects and patients. And we found that there are two regions, one in the sensory-motor cortex and one in the parietal cortex, that if we use these two markers, we are able to diagnose spasmodic dysphonia in a population of 62 subjects with 71% accuracy. So this is above the chance of 50%, where you would flip the coin and just decide if it is SD or healthy subject. And this was promising. Next, we looked into sporadic and familial, and again, there is a caveat of not all sporadics probably being sporadic patients. And a combination of, again, of different set of brain regions in somatosensory cortex, in parietal region, and again, on the other side of the brain, in the sensory motor region, gave us accuracy of 81% in diagnosing sporadic versus familial. So this probably does not make immediate clinical implication or impact, but this information helps us to stratify these patients appropriately for genetic studies. If some patients from sporadic group fall into familial group, we might look much further in this within this group and figure out what might be a genetic base for sporadic patients to be misclassified as familial patients. And finally, we were also able to identify a difference between AD and AD forms with an accuracy of 71%. So the message is that there are regional network alterations, not functional activity alterations, but network alterations that may serve as the diagnostic biomarkers. This is, of course, not 100% accuracy, which may be driven by the number of subjects that have been included. These are limited to about 30-35 subjects per group. And one of the reasons is that also familial cases are quite rare, and we had to adjust our statistics to that. But we are in the process of recruiting more patients, especially with familial SD, in order to figure out if we can improve this accuracy, as well as to validate this approach with other machine learning algorithms. So the conclusion is that there are abnormal regional connectivity in addition to abnormal activity of the brain within the sensory motor and frontoparietal network. Genes and clinical phenotypes impact the extent of abnormal connectivity, and regional alterations in these regions may serve as imaging biomarkers of SD. Next, let's look into genes, since we've been talking about familial patients. Focal dystonias are the most common form, and most dystonias are sporadic. As I mentioned, up to 16% of dystonia patients in SD, between 12 and 15%, according to some studies, have a familial history with reduced penetrance. So gene discovery has been difficult and remains difficult because there are no large families with very far apart patients in their families. However, the advanced methodologies such as next generation whole exome sequencing enabled us and others to discover 4 genes that have been associated with dystonia, with primary dystonia, with the first gene identified in 1987 by Laurie Zillis, the DYT1 gene, that is responsible mostly for the generalized form of dystonia, though we have seen also patients who had very focal form of dystonia, like Reiter-Schram, that were carriers of the DYT1 mutation. The next gene identified was, again, by Laurie Zillis, was the DYT6 gene, which is adolescent onset dystonia of mixed type. That also has laryngeal involvement. And the latest genes that were found was DYT4, which is in whispering dysphonia. It resembles SD, it's not SD, it's found in Australian family, but it is also associated with very wide phenotype clinical symptomatology, actually not related to dystonia. There have been a few other genes identified, which is DYT23, tremulous craniocervical dystonia. This is more segmental dystonia, affecting more than two adjacent body regions. Adult onset cervical dystonia and adult onset cranial cervical dystonia. So we screened 57 patients with spasmodic dysphonia, and we looked for 4 of these genes, which were verified actually. It's DYT1, DYT4, DYT6, and DYT25. We found that none of the patients had DYT1 or 6 genes. One patient was a carrier of DYT25 mutation. What was interesting about this patient was that he had classical ADHD and he was sporadic. He didn't have any family member who was affected with this disorder, with SD or any other dystonia. However, when we looked into his parents, we found that his mother, who was healthy individual, she was a carrier of mutation, non-manifesting carrier of the mutation. She did not develop her symptoms, and she probably will not because she's 85 plus, so probably chances are quite low. And this is what I mean when I was saying that there are patients with sporadic dystonia, with spasmodic dysphonia, who may be actually carriers of dystonia mutation. So we looked into this patient. It's N of 1, but still it shows some interesting findings. We combined patients. We combined this one patient with matched age, gender matched patient with Dr. sporadic spasmodic dysphonia, as well as familial Dr. spasmodic dysphonia, and compared them to healthy subjects. And we saw that the patients, this large combined group of patients, shows brain activation changes during speech production that are very typical of regular abnormalities that we see in other studies. However, we also compared this one patient versus sporadic, combined group of sporadic and familial Dr. spasmodic dysphonia patients, and we found that this one mutation carrier has very significant changes in specific brain regions that are maybe associated with this mutation. So it shows that patients are different. They are different not only by their clinical symptoms, but they also different by the extent of brain abnormalities that probably underlie that different symptomatology. As I mentioned, we don't know what genes are responsible for spasmodic dysphonia. We're looking into that with laboratories, but we don't have a specific gene as of right now. But we looked at what might be the heritable risk of spasmodic dysphonia. For that, we assessed a polygenic risk score that quantifies the aggregate effect of alleles associated with the disorder. And we conducted whole exome next generation sequencing of 57 SD patients. We identified computed polygenic risk score from 1,800 genetic markers, and then we looked how these markers might be associated with abnormal resting state brain connectivity that I showed you on previous slides. These are the regions that have been identified to be abnormal in a group of patients, SD patients, compared to healthy subjects. And the regions are within the sensory motor as well as the frontoparietal networks. There is also involvement of the pituitary. As we know, dystonia has been considered a basal ganglia disorder, so this is in line with that notion. However, when we looked into the association between polygenic risk and abnormal connectivity, we found the most significant association, which is involved between this risk and abnormal connectivity between sensory-motor region and parietal region. A parietal region was also associated with the onset of the disorder, which means that it has been abnormal from the very early stages of the disorder. So coming back to the genes, we looked with gene set enrichment analysis. We looked at how these genes that form those 1800 markers and that are associated with this connectivity abnormality, how they are, what pathways they make and what function, cellular function, molecular function they may affect. And we found that these genes are associated with synapses, neuron projections, synaptic transmission, and neuronal development. These abnormalities may underlie in the molecular pathophysiology of spasmodic dysphonia further, but here we were successful to demonstrate this not only imaging abnormalities and phylogenetic abnormalities, but also link them together and bring down to the symptoms. In conclusion, genetically vulnerable connectivity of the sensor-motor and parietal cortices represents a neuroimaging marker. We need to look into this further, but I think we're on the right path. Genes involved in synaptic transmission and neuron development may be linked to molecular pathophysiology of SD. And just bringing everything together, it seems that dystonia is not a basal ganglia disorder. It's a functional network disorder of multi-level complexity. And different dystonia subclasses likely follow divergent pathophysiological mechanisms. Basal ganglia are still at the core of large-scale network disorganization in dystonia as well as in spasmodic dysphonia. However, cortical, sensory-motor, and parietal alterations are linked to a genetic predisposition to develop the symptoms. And these cortical alterations may represent imaging biomarkers for objective diagnosis, hopefully prediction of dystonia risk, and possibly they may be targeted with some novel treatment options, like, for example, DBS, that has great benefits for patients with generalized dystonia, cervical dystonia, some reports of rightward cramp, but I don't know of any single patient with spasmodic dystonia who would have undergone DBS and had improvement. And I think the same is happening in Parkinson's disease. DBS does not really improve speech. So my belief is that there should be another target. STM, subthalamic nucleus, or globus pallidus stimulation that is very common for Parkinson's and dystonias. It's just not working for voice improvement. So identifying these targets in the brain that contribute to the pathophysiology of dystonia might also serve as novel targets for DBS. And finally, I want to thank everybody who contributed. This is my team, or actually half of my team, and of course all the support that I got from clinicians and